Hello adventurer. So you've created your landscape, you textured it, and now it's time for the fun step, which is placing that vegetation. Now if you remember, in the previous video we simulated our vegetation in Gaia and we got these following masks. So these 12 are the one we are going to focus. These are our vegetation. So basically we have 4 different types of vegetation. Our trees, shrubs, flow vegetation and grass. And in Unreal there are 2 ways to simulate an vegetation. Either we place them with Grassmaps or simulate them with Procedural spawner. So what's the difference? So Grassmap, as the name suggests, is for things like grass, things that do not need any collision. And Procedural spawner allows collision, so the smaller vegetation, the grass, some smaller rocks or maybe flowers can be spawned with grass maps, and the other vegetation that we need to interact with, or if we need collision then we need to spawn them using procedural spawner. So out of our 4 vegetation we will spawn 3 of them with the procedural spawner and we'll spawn the last one with grass maps. We'll spawn our trees, shrubs and flowers with procedural spawner and spawn our grass with Grassmap. Flowers are a middle ground. We can use either Grassmap or procedural spawner, but if we want to interact with them then we'll use procedural spawner, which is exactly what we'll do. So I imported all these masks here. Now we don't really need all of them. We'll need only those that we place with Grassmap, that is these 3 grass masks. Now other than the arboreal mask, we also need our dead zone. So dead zone are the area where we do not want any vegetation. And there is another one, which is our lake shore. Now I did not discuss this in the previous video, but this is basically area around our lake. We'll use this to spawn taller grass around where our lake is. So we'll start with the grass map. Before that, let's make some folders. So for our vegetation, let's make a folder called Procedurals. This is where all of our vegetation would be, and in here we'll divide those vegetation in 2 types. The first one are the grass maps and the others are procedural foliage spawner. Now we'll start with our grass maps. So right click, under foliage we have our landscape grass type. So we'll click this and let's name it landscape grass type underscore grassman. Now let's create 3 more of these, one for grass parse A, one for grass parse B, and the last one for our lake shore. So right click, foliage, lgt underscore grass parse A, and we can just duplicate this. So Control D and grass parse B, again Control D, and this time lake shore. Now let's open them. Now the grass map would need a mesh that it needs to spawn. So in our array we'll add an element, and in here grass mesh we'll put our field grass. SM field grass 1. Let's open it. It has only like 765 triangles, so it's pretty good for our grass. So this would be our main grass. Now let's open grass parts A, B and lake shore. So grass parts A, let's add another type of grass. Here, just to differentiate between these grass, I'm going to use the same grass, but I duplicated these and changed the material. And inside those materials I changed the color just a little bit. So this is more gray and this is more green. So now we can differentiate between these 3 grass. Alright, so now let's put these mesh here. So field grass 2, and here field grass 3. Okay. And on lakeshore, let's add some tall grass. Let me see if I have a mesh for that. I think it'll be hard to see this mesh, but let's put it anyway. If we don't see it, then we'll use another mesh. Alright, so we created our landscape grass types. Now we need to add Grassmap in our material and tell them to use these grass types to spawn our vegetation. So let's select the landscape and go to the material, search for the parent. Here is our parent material. So now let's here search for grass and add a landscape grass output. And here we can put all those grass types. So first let's browse to the grass main here. And having it selected here, we'll click this. So we have our grass main here. Let's rename it grass main and add some more elements. Let's call this grass parse A and this one grass parse B. And the final one would be our lake shore. Let's add another one. This would be for our small rocks. Now this goes beyond our vegetation, but it will look nice. So let's duplicate this and name it small rocks. And having that selected, and we need to change the mesh here. Let's change the rock, maybe this one, and let's save it. Okay, here. So now this grass map, this needs an input to tell it where we want to spawn our stuff. Now this can be done in a number of ways. So the input it needs is a float value. So float like 0, 0.5 and something like that. Let's use a constant here. So if we hold 1 on our keyboard and left click, so it spawned a float. Let's put a value of 1 here and connect it to our main grass. Now if we save it, so here we put 1, which means it will be constant throughout our landscape. So our grass would be on every part of the landscape. So if we go closer here, there is our grass, there is our grass. And if we move here on our snow, there is our grass. But obviously we don't want that. But this is just to show that it needs a value between 0 and 1, and if the value is 1 at some point, then it will spawn the grass. So now we can control where this value is 1 and where this value is 0. Again by a number of things. Layer sample. Now if we put a name of one of the layers here and connect it, then the grass will spawn only in that layers. So let's take a look at our layer blend node. So here we have different layers like ground A, moss, cliff, rock and all that. So let's put moss here. Now remember the name here and in layer blend should be exactly the same along with the capitals. Otherwise it won't work. So again if we save it, so this is the moss texture, and if we go closer, so our grass is present here. But if we go to some other texture, like this one, so there is no grass here. Now this grass is leaking into this layer because this is where these two layers are blending. So although we don't see the moss texture here, the moss layer is present. And if we go right around here, so there is no grass. Again no grass. But if we come back to our moss texture, there is our grass. So what this tells the input is everywhere this layer is present, the value is 1, else the value is 0. Okay, simple. Now we can do a bunch of math operations after this to limit where we want our grass and where we don't. So the most commons would be to add or subtract any layer from it. So if you see here, the most layers is present here, although we can't see it because it's blending with this ground texture, but the value of moss layer here is very low. So maybe we have like 0.1 of moss here and 0.9 of this ground. Since the ground is dominating the moss, we see the ground texture. But if we don't want any grass here, we'll subtract it. So we'll duplicate this, Control D, and here again check the name ground A and put the exact name here, ground A, and from this append a subtract node. Okay, we are subtracting it and input. And now if you take a look, if the moss is present, it's present, but since we subtracted the ground layer, there is no grass here. So the grass here disappeared. So just like that, we can do math operation between our layers. Now this one also has its limitations. The most prominent one would be it limits our vegetation to a specific layer, which can be a good thing in certain cases. Like here, we only want the grass and the moss texture. But for some other vegetation, it may or may not be true. Also, not everyone likes to use this layer-based approach, so there is another way. So basically, it needs an input that tells it 0, don't place grass, 1, place grass. And we can also get that from a texture. So the ones that we imported, let's put them here. Let's open this. So this texture will basically tell it, don't place any grass here and place grass here. Really straightforward. So we'll delete it and plug this in. Before plugging it in, make sure it's a mask. If it is not a mask, then open this one and see in which channel that data is. Here, since it's a mask, it's same in all the red, green and blue channels. And you can also use a splat map. So splat map would be useful because here essentially we are carrying the same data in each of the channels, which is a bit wasteful. So instead of using 3 texture samples, if we use a splat map, then we can only use 1 texture sample. And then we can use different channels to store different data. So we can store up to 4 different masks here. But let's just do different texture samples here. Also don't put this one because it has all the RGB values. We only need a float, which means any one of these. So this was our main grass. So we'll put in our main grass. This is our subgrass A. So subgrass A. And this is our subgrass B. So subgrass B. And then there is also our lake shore right here. And for our small rock, we added it at the last moment, so I don't have a mask for it. So we'll use the layer based approach here. But instead of limiting it to layers, we'll limit it to where we don't want the rock. So we'll press 1, left click, and we get a value. We'll put it 1, that means spawn the rock everywhere, but we'll subtract some things. So use the subtract node. Again, landscape layer sample. So we don't want it to be in the lake. Let's check our layer blend. And we don't want in our cliff and snow. So again, duplicate this, put cliff, snow. So subtract lake, subtract cliff, and subtract snow. Alright, then right click and collapse now. Okay, so didn't make a mesh. I should have created the splat maps, but no point worrying about it now. Also, before we save, let's decrease the grass density, otherwise you might have a crash incoming. Okay, Everything looks good now. Let's save it and save. So I forgot one basic thing. Can you guess what it is? Alright, I think you have guessed it. We forgot to add our UVs. So to add UVs in a landscape, we'll use the landscape layer coordinate. Okay, and in the mapping scale, we'll put the resolution of our landscape. So either you have 1K map or 4K or 8K. So depending on what you have, you put the scale here and it will match this texture to the landscape. Now we don't use multiple UVs. So we have created one global UV and we created a portal here. It's called named reroute in Unreal. So if you don't have one, then add this and add the name. And then later if you search for that SDK, okay, here we have it. So it works the same as the portals in Gaia. So we created a portal here called UVs and we'll use that here. And this time if we save it, so we can see our main grass here. The other grass should be somewhere around here. You can already see that this density is very low. So let's increase the density a bit. 400 would be fine. Okay. And have the same density for this one and this one. Okay, maybe now we can find them. This is a bit embarrassing, but we forgot to add them here. So let's go to Grassman, Grass Pass A, Grass Pass B. That should do it. Okay, so we have our Grass Pass B here. This is our main grass, and there should be Grass Pass A somewhere here. So here we can see all three of them blending together. Alright, so we have our grass. Now there are some extra things that we can do here just to make our life easier. So we can make a variable here that we can control through our material instance. So let's search for bool parameter and name it enable Grassman. So we add this static switch. So when this boolean is true, then the switch will give this as an output. Otherwise, again we'll hold 1, left click, 0. Otherwise it will give a 0 value. So just like this we can control whenever we want to disable our grass. Now this is just for debug, so you can delete this later if you want. So we can do this for all of them. Again, hold control, grass pass A, hold control, grass pass B, just like that. And don't forget to change the name, grass pass A, grass pass B, and we need two more. So this would be Lakeshore, and this would be Small Rocks. Something like this. Now we'll right click and expand all those nodes. Right here, just to make the organization a bit better, we'll add it in a foliage group. Copy this. Now we can collapse all these. Right click, collapse nodes, and let's rename it rock. Okay, there it is. There's our lake shore. Add this to foliage, and again add this to foliage, add this to foliage, and add this to foliage. Again, this is debug just to make our life easier. So we can add another master control. So let's duplicate this switch. And again, duplicate this and this. Okay, this time instead of enable, let's call disable Grassmaps. So if this is true, then this will go in the true, then this will go in false. Again, this is optional. You can always come here and under foliage put low. So everything is gone, but just to have that option. Again, put it in foliage, okay, already in foliage. Duplicate this. Put it here, duplicate again. Put it here. Where is it? Here. Again, one more duplicate. Here. Let's leave the rock. And this time we don't want to change the name because the same parameter is used. We can always delete all these and connect this one to all of them. Works all the same. And now let's save it. Now under our material instance, if we search for foliage, we have an option to disable all the grass maps or to disable any individual grass map. Let's come here and scalability to high. Since none of this is ticked on, all the grass is gone. Alright, so that's all about our grass maps. Now we have simulated one of the 4 vegetation, and for the other 3 we'll use procedural spawner. I want to thank all my Patreon supporters. Thank you for making these videos possible. That concludes this quest. Next time we will simulate all the remaining vegetation. I'll see you next time. Until then, enjoy what you're doing.